everybody. This is Emma, and I have got Gary, one of my colleagues at Naviant, with me today. And we're going to talk a little bit about some principles for project management that will help set any digital transformation project that you're working with a vendor up for success. So, before we dive into some of my questions, Gary, would you mind giving an introduction of your role and kind of some of your experience?
You bet. I've been managing technology related projects for most of my career, 25 years or more, and have been led project management office in a number of companies that I've worked in. I've mostly been involved in consulting oriented and service delivery oriented roles in doing that, but I've like I said, led a lot of technology projects and also large enterprise change projects that involve technology, strategy, process change, and so forth. So I've been doing this a long time, Emma.
Perfect. See, the expertise. That's why you're here today with us. So, my first question for you is when a company is on the cusp of embarking on a digital transformation project, and kind of specifically when they're working with a vendor, what do you see as the role of the executive sponsor within that project?
That's a great question because sometimes it's kind of challenging to understand who the executive sponsor is, and where some of the confusion happens sometimes is, who signs the contract versus who has the most at stake here with regard to the result of the final project effort, okay? But the executive sponsor on a project should be the person who is responsible for the business case, who's responsible for the business results of whatever we're doing. And a couple of the challenges I've seen, Emma, frankly, is again, I mentioned who is the person who signed the contract the right person? Sometimes, and I've seen this as a challenge too, sometimes somebody from IT is designated as the project sponsor, and normally they're not the ones that have the biggest stake in regards to the results of the project.
Mm-hmm.
So the executive sponsor should be someone normally in the business who is high enough in the organization to make the decisions with regard to the direction of the project, resources assigned to the project, resolving issues that come up that can't be resolved in the working team and so forth. So project sponsor needs to be empowered to do those things and kind of is at the top of the pyramid if you want to look at it from that perspective.
I'm glad you mentioned that idea of the role that maybe IT has versus that executive sponsor. And this is kind of where, in the world of digital transformation, business and IT have to work together to kind of make these projects successful. So I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about the idea of a steering committee and maybe how IT and that executive sponsor would collaborate in that steering committee kind of environment with some other folks from the organization. Would you mind talking a little bit about kind of who we would suggest be a part of that steering committee and maybe what the role of that group is?
Yes, and I want to do that in the context of using a vendor again, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the executive sponsor obviously is a key member of that project steering committee, but my rule of thumb with regard to identifying who should be on the steering committee is, first of all, anyone who has resources assigned to the project. So then, in this case, then it might be the CIO that sits on the steering committee if it's a technology project, because technology resources will be assigned. And then whoever has a stake in the outcome of the project, that might be people who are getting the direct business benefits, or this might be people who tangentially will be involved in actually delivery and ongoing execution of whatever the project is intended to do. Okay, so quick example then, one project I was on, the steering committee was made up of the business leader, who was the project executive sponsor. I did bring in the head of MIS in that company because, of course, they were going to be involved in the technology solution, but also sales on there because his people were going to be responsible for delivering some of the results of the project. So that was a steering committee, small steering committee in that case. But that's the idea. So people that either are going to commit resources to the project, or people who have a direct stake in the outcome, or are directly involved in whatever the change in the business operations is going to be.
Perfect. And then hopefully the idea would be if you run into roadblocks or challenges, that the right folks are a part of that conversation to maybe help mitigate those risks and move beyond them throughout the project.
Exactly. And then, Emma, just one more thing. I'm sorry, from the business.
No, perfect.
From the vendor side, whoever the peers to those people are from the client on the vendor side should be in the steering committee meeting too, or be on the steering committee meeting as well. So, usually that's a more senior level person in the vendor organization and someone who is directly involved in executing the project.
Perfect. So one of the other things that we've talked about is that, this steering committee kind of helps manage change and is, almost the one that's communicating this change out to the organization. And so do you have any tips or suggestions for how these stakeholders within the project can communicate this change out to the organization and kind of help manage that evolution as the project goes into implementation or takes flight within the organization?
Yes. Someone on the working team needs to have as their job on the project, almost like a marketing position on the project with regard to communicating out to the people who will be most directly impacted and involved, the change that's coming, and then along the way, it almost is like, I like to call it drip feeding information out to them that culminates in the training and the testing and the eventual rollout of the solution. When I say the word solution, I mean a technology, process change, in some cases even changing the content of people's jobs, okay? But that is a really key role on the project team, and they're responsible, back up to the project sponsor and so forth with regard to that communication plan and program and so forth. There's another key aspect too here, Anna, that you and I have talked about as well, and that is it's really, really key to commit the right business sources to the project team. And a challenge that we often run into is that companies sometimes don't think completely through the amount of commitment that key people in their organization need to have on the project team. And in some, so for example, a challenge we have is people in the business who've been committed to the project, conflicts with their quote day job. And sometimes you need to be able to provide them backup so that they can provide adequate time to the project, particularly in the early stages and then in testing. I've seen people who have been committed, up to half time from the business to participate in the requirements definition and the design, and then on the back end on the testing and the training and so forth. But in terms of the transition, it's really key to have people on the working team who can then be ambassadors out for the project itself, who've been involved enough to understand the changes that are coming, why decisions were made, and can be kind of the go-to people once it starts to roll out for the organization as a whole. So I think those are some key things to think about with regard to transition.
Perfect. And I know we've had much longer conversations than this 10 minutes together in the past. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is link within this post to a document that you can go to our website and download that has a health checklist that Gary put together on maybe some things you want to keep in mind when you are, again, moving forward with a digital transformation project. So, Gary, thank you for joining me, and feel free to reach out with anybody or any questions. Have a great day.